The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Silver Creek, Arizona, in 1887, but 17-year-old Elena Morrison couldn't see them. She had been blind since birth, navigating her world through sound, touch, and an intuition that seemed almost supernatural to those who knew her. What she could sense, however, was the tension crackling through the wooden walls of the boarding house where she lived with her stepmother, Constance Morrison. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena's fingers traced the familiar grooves in the kitchen table as she heard Constance's heavy footsteps approaching. There was something different in the rhythm today, purposeful, almost predatory. The scent of Constance's cheap lavender perfume grew stronger, mixed with the perpetual smell of whiskey that seemed to follow her stepmother everywhere. Elena. Constance's voice was honey-sweet, which Elena had learned to fear more than her stepmother's usual harsh tone. "We need to have a conversation about your future." Elena Morrison had learned early in life that her blindness wasn't just a personal challenge. It was a family burden, at least according to Constance. Her father, Thomas Morrison, had died 3 years earlier in a mining accident, leaving behind debts that seemed to multiply like desert weeds after a rare rainstorm. Constance, who had married Thomas only 2 years before his death, found herself responsible for a blind stepdaughter she had never wanted and financial obligations that threatened to crush them both. The boarding house where they lived was a testament to their declining circumstances. Once, Elena's family had owned a modest but comfortable home on the outskirts of town. Her mother, Sarah, had died when Elena was only 8, but she had filled their house with music, laughter, and the kind of warmth that made Elena's disability feel like just another part of who she was, rather than a defining limitation. Sarah had taught Elena to navigate the world with confidence. She had shown her how to cook by smell and touch, how to identify people by their footsteps and breathing patterns, how to read the mood of a room by the subtle shifts in conversation and the quality of silence. Most importantly, Sarah had convinced Elena that her blindness didn't make her less valuable as a person. Constance Morrison held no such beliefs. From the moment she married Thomas, Constance made it clear that Elena was an inconvenience. She spoke about Elena in third person, even when the girl was in the room, referring to the burden or your blind daughter when addressing Thomas. After Thomas died, these references became more pointed and cruel. "I can't keep feeding someone who contributes nothing," Constance would mutter while preparing their meager meals. Dead weight in a sinking ship. Elena tried to prove her worth in whatever ways she could. She took in mending work, her nimble fingers able to repair tears and replace buttons by touch alone. She helped other families in the boarding house with their children, telling stories and singing songs her mother had taught her. But the money she earned was a fraction of what Constance spent on her daily bottle of whiskey and her frequent card games at Murphy's Saloon. The town of Silver Creek was rough and unforgiving, a place where the strong survived and the weak were quickly forgotten. It had sprung up around a silver mine that promised wealth, but delivered hardship to most who sought their fortune there. The mine had played out 2 years ago, leaving behind a community of people too stubborn or too broke to move on. Those who remained scraped by through farming, trading, or providing services to the occasional travelers passing through on their way to California. In this harsh environment, Elena's blindness made her particularly vulnerable. She couldn't work in the fields or tend livestock effectively. She couldn't serve drinks in the saloon or work in any of the businesses that required quick visual responses to customer needs. Constance never missed an opportunity to remind her of these limitations. "Look around you, girl," Constance would say during their evening meals of beans and hard bread. "See what good your pretty voice and clever hands do when there's real work to be done." Elena had learned not to point out that she couldn't, in fact, look around. Such observations only made Constance angrier. The boarding house itself reflected their circumstances. Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly woman who owned it, charged reduced rent in exchange for Elena's help with cleaning and laundry. Elena had memorized every squeaky floorboard, every loose banister, every door that stuck. She could navigate the 3-story building in complete darkness, which, for her, was no different from daylight. The other residents were a mixture of down-on-their-luck families, aging prospectors who couldn't accept that the silver boom was over, and working women whose employment prospects were limited and often unsavory. Elena had grown close to some of them, particularly Mrs. Chun, a Chinese woman who ran a small laundry service from the basement, and her daughter May, who was only a few years younger than Elena. Mrs. Chun spoke limited English, but she and Elena communicated through gestures, shared work, and a mutual understanding of what it meant to be different in a place that valued conformity. May often translated for her mother, and through these conversations, Elena learned about resilience, dignity, and finding beauty in small moments despite difficult circumstances. It was Mrs. Chun who first warned Elena about the changes she sensed in Constance's behavior. "Your stepmother," Mrs. Chun said through May's translation. "She has the look of someone making plans. Be careful, Elena. Plans made in desperation often harm the innocent." Elena felt the truth of this warning in her bones, but she couldn't imagine what plans Constance might be making. Their world was so small, their options so limited. What could Constance possibly be planning that would change anything? The answer came on a sweltering Thursday morning in late June. Elena was hanging laundry in the small courtyard behind the boarding house, her hands guiding wet clothes onto the line with practiced efficiency. She could hear the normal sounds of the town beginning its day: horses and wagons rumbling past, shopkeepers opening their doors, children playing in the streets before the heat became unbearable. But there was another sound that morning, one that made Elena pause with a damp sheet in her hands. It was the sound of several horses approaching at a steady, purposeful pace. Not the hurried clip-clop of someone late for an appointment, or the lazy amble of a leisurely ride. This was the sound of people who knew exactly where they were going and why. The horses stopped in front of the boarding house. Elena heard boots hitting the ground, spurs jingling softly, and low voices speaking in what sounded like Spanish mixed with English and another language she didn't recognize. One voice stood out deeper than the others, with a quality of authority that made people listen when he spoke. Elena continued hanging laundry, but she found herself straining to hear the conversation. The front door of the boarding house opened and closed. Heavy footsteps crossed the wooden floors inside. Then she heard Constance's voice, higher and more animated than usual, followed by Mrs. Abernathy's nervous flutter. 20 minutes later, Constance appeared in the courtyard. Elena could sense her stepmother's excitement like electricity in the air. "Elena, come inside. We have visitors." "What kind of visitors?" Elena asked, but Constance was already walking away. Inside, Elena's heightened senses immediately picked up details that painted a picture of the strangers. She could smell leather, horses, and something else, a scent like sage and wind that seemed to cling to people who spent most of their time outdoors. There were at least 3 men, possibly 4, and their boots were well made but worn from hard use. "Elena," Constance's voice carried an unfamiliar note of deference. "I'd like you to meet Mr. Diego Vasquez. He's here on behalf of a potential business arrangement." Elena felt a chill despite the morning heat. In her experience, business arrangements involving Constance rarely ended well for anyone except Constance herself. Diego Vasquez spoke with a slight accent that suggested Spanish was his first language, but his English was precise and formal. "Miss Morrison, it is a pleasure to meet you. I understand you are unmarried." The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Elena felt the direction this conversation was heading, and her stomach began to twist with dread. "Yes," she answered carefully. "I am unmarried. Mr. Vasquez represents someone who is looking for a wife. Constance interjected, her voice bright with false cheer. Someone of considerable resources. Elena's hands clenched at her sides. I'm not interested in marriage to a stranger. Now, Elena. Constance's tone sharpened. Don't be hasty. You haven't heard the details of this generous offer. Diego cleared his throat. Perhaps I should explain the situation more fully. My employer is a man of significant influence in this territory. He owns extensive landholdings, cattle, and mining interests. He is looking for a wife who would be grateful for the security such a marriage would provide. The word grateful hit Elena like a slap. She understood immediately what kind of marriage was being proposed, one where her disability would make her appropriately submissive and thankful for any man willing to take her on. I appreciate the consideration, Elena said slowly, but I must decline. I have no interest in marrying someone I've never met. The silence that followed was pregnant with tension. Elena could hear Constance's sharp intake of breath and feel the disapproval radiating from her stepmother like heat from a stove. Elena, Constance said, her voice dangerously quiet, perhaps you and I should discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss, Elena replied firmly. My answer is no. Diego Vasquez spoke again, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been sympathy. Miss Morrison, I understand your reluctance. However, I should mention that my employer is prepared to be very generous to your family in exchange for this arrangement. The sum he's offering would eliminate all debts and provide ongoing support. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She knew exactly how much debt Constance carried, how desperate their financial situation had become. The offer Diego was describing represented more money than they would see in years of their current existence. How much? Constance asked, and Elena could hear the hunger in her voice. Diego named a figure that made Constance gasp audibly. It was more money than Elena's father had earned in his entire lifetime. You see, Elena, Constance said, her voice now urgent and persuasive, this is an opportunity we cannot afford to pass up. Literally cannot afford. Elena felt trapped between her own instincts for self-preservation and the crushing weight of their circumstances. She knew that Constance was capable of making her life unbearable if she stood in the way of this windfall. But the idea of marrying a complete stranger, especially one who would view her blindness as an asset because it would make her easier to control, filled her with revulsion. I need time to think, Elena said finally. Of course, Diego replied smoothly. My employer is a patient man. However, he would like an answer within 1 week. If you agree to the arrangement, the wedding would take place in 2 weeks' time. After Diego and his companions left, Elena sat in her small room, listening to Constance pace the floors below. She could hear her stepmother muttering to herself, occasionally laughing with excitement at the prospect of sudden wealth. Through the thin walls, Elena could also hear Mrs. Chun and May speaking in rapid Chinese, their voices filled with concern. Elena understood that she was facing the most important decision of her life. The marriage Diego had described would provide financial security, but at the cost of her autonomy and quite possibly her happiness. Refusing might mean continued poverty and Constance's escalating resentment, but it would preserve her right to choose her own future. As the sun set over Silver Creek that evening, painting the sky in colors Elena could only imagine, she found herself wondering about the mysterious man who wanted to marry her. Who was he? Why was he willing to pay such an enormous sum for a bride he had never met? And what did it mean that he specifically wanted someone who would be grateful for his offer? The answers to these questions would prove to be far more complex and surprising than Elena could possibly imagine. But first, she had to decide whether she was willing to take the risk of finding out. The following morning brought no relief from the oppressive heat, but it did bring clarity to Elena's situation in the most unwelcome way possible. She woke to the sound of Constance rummaging through their shared trunk, pulling out what few decent clothes Elena owned. "Get up," Constance commanded without preamble. "We're going to town to get you properly fitted for new dresses." Elena sat up slowly, her mind still foggy with sleep. "New dresses? We can't afford." "We can now," Constance interrupted, her voice carrying a triumphant edge that made Elena's stomach clench. "I sent word to Mr. Vasquez this morning. The wedding is in 10 days. The words hit Elena like cold water. She had asked for a week to decide, but Constance had made the decision for her. "You had no right. I had every right." Constance's voice rose to a near shout. "I'm your guardian, and I'm responsible for your welfare. This marriage will secure both our futures." Elena's hands trembled as she reached for her clothes. The betrayal cut deeper than she had expected, though she realized she shouldn't have been surprised. Constance had never once considered Elena's wishes when making decisions that affected her life. "What did you tell him?" Elena asked quietly. "I told him you were honored by the proposal and eager to begin your new life." Constance's footsteps moved around the small room as she continued gathering Elena's belongings. "He's sending a carriage for you tomorrow to take you to his employer's ranch. You'll stay there until the wedding to get acquainted." The euphemism hung heavy in the air. Elena understood that she was being sold like livestock, delivered to her purchaser for inspection before the final transaction. Mrs. Ching appeared in their doorway, speaking rapidly in Chinese. May pushed past her mother, her young face flushed with anger. "Elena, my mother says this is wrong. She says we should help you run away." Constance whirled around, her face contorting with rage. "How dare you interfere in family business? Get out of our room." But May stood her ground, switching to English so Elena could understand everything. "My mother has saved money. We can help you get to San Francisco. There are schools there for people like you, places where you can learn skills and support yourself." For a moment, Elena felt a surge of hope. Escape seemed possible, even logical. But then reality crashed back down. "I can't ask you to sacrifice your savings for me. And even if I could get to San Francisco, how would I survive alone?" "You wouldn't be alone," May insisted. "My mother has relatives there. They would help you." Constance stepped between them, her voice low and dangerous. "If you help her run away, I'll make sure Sheriff Thompson knows about your mother's unofficial business arrangements. I'm sure the good people of Silver Creek would be very interested to learn exactly what kind of laundry service she's really running." Elena felt May stiffen beside her. She didn't fully understand what Constance was threatening, but the implication was clear enough. Mrs. Chun had secrets that could destroy her family's livelihood, and Constance was willing to expose them to keep Elena under control. "It's all right, May," Elena said softly. "Your mother has done enough for me already." After the Chuns left, Constance sat heavily on the bed beside Elena. Her voice took on the false sweetness that Elena had learned to dread. "I know this seems sudden, but you'll thank me someday. Marriage to a wealthy man means security, respect, a place in society. Do you want to spend the rest of your life in a boarding house dependent on the charity of strangers?" Elena wanted to point out that she was already dependent on the charity of strangers, but she held her tongue. Instead, she asked the question that had been haunting her since Diego's visit. "What do you know about this man I'm supposed to marry? What's his name? Where does he live?" Constance was quiet for a long moment. "His name is Joseph Crowfeather. He owns a ranch about 30 miles north of here, near Apache territory. Mr. Vasquez says he's well respected in the region." The hesitation in Constance's voice told Elena there was more to the story. "What aren't you telling me?" "He's Apache," Constance said finally. "Half Apache anyway. His father was a white rancher. His mother was from one of the local tribes. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. In 1887 Arizona, the Apache Wars were still fresh in everyone's memory. Most white settlers viewed any Apache connection with suspicion and fear, regardless of the individual circumstances. "Is that why he's having trouble finding a wife?" Elena asked. "Among other things," Constance admitted. "But Elena, that works in our favor. A man with his background can't afford to be choosy. He needs a wife who won't judge him for his heritage, and you." She let the implication hang unspoken. Elena understood. Because she was blind, she wouldn't see his features, wouldn't be influenced by whatever physical characteristics marked him as different. Because she was desperate, she wouldn't be in a position to refuse him. Her disability in this twisted logic made her the perfect bride for a man who faced his own form of social exclusion. The rest of that day passed in a blur of preparations Elena had no part in choosing. Constance took her to Martha Brennan's dress shop, where Elena was measured and fitted for what Martha called a proper trousseau. The dresses were finer than anything Elena had worn since her mother's death, but they felt like a costume for a role she didn't want to play. Martha, who had known Elena since childhood, seemed uncomfortable with the entire transaction. Her normally cheerful chatter was stilted and forced as she pinned fabric and adjusted seams. "We'll be married in 8 days, he said as he prepared to leave. "If there's anything you need before then, please ask Maria. She's been with our family for 20 years and knows how to run a household." "Mr. Crowfeather," Elena said as he reached the door, "may I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy with this arrangement?" Again, that long pause. "I think happiness is a luxury neither of us can afford, Miss Morrison. But I believe we can build something worthwhile together, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals." After he left, Elena sat on the edge of the bed, holding Mrs. Chun's jade pendant and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new temporary home. Through the open window came the calls of nightbirds, the distant lowing of cattle, and the whisper of wind through grass. For the first time since Constance had announced her engagement, Elena allowed herself to consider that this marriage might not be the disaster she had imagined. Joseph Crowfeather seemed decent, if reserved. His home was comfortable and well-maintained. And perhaps most importantly, he had treated her with more courtesy in one evening than Constance had shown her in 3 years. But as she prepared for bed, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that there were still secrets hidden beneath the surface of this arrangement. Joseph's carefully measured responses, Diego's formal presentation of the proposal, even Pete's hesitant descriptions of her future husband, everything suggested that the full truth about Joseph Crowfeather and his reasons for seeking a blind bride had yet to be revealed. In 8 days, she would become Mrs. Joseph Crowfeather. The question that haunted her as she drifted off to sleep was whether that transformation would bring the security and respect Constance had promised, or whether she was simply trading one form of captivity for another. Elena woke to sounds she had never heard before: the soft nickering of horses in nearby paddocks, the distant ring of a hammer on an anvil, and voices speaking in what she now recognized as a mixture of English and Apache. Dawn had brought with it the realization that her life had already changed more dramatically than she had understood. Maria, the housekeeper, knocked softly on her door before entering with a breakfast tray. The older woman moved with quiet efficiency, and when she spoke, her voice carried the musical cadence of someone who had grown up speaking Apache as her first language. "Mr. Joseph says you should rest this morning," Maria said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "But if you feel well, he would like to show you the ranch this afternoon." Elena sat up, running her fingers through her hair to tame it. "Maria, may I ask you something?" "Of course, miss." "How long have you known Mr. Crowfeather?" Maria settled into the chair across from Elena, her movements suggesting she was comfortable taking time for conversation. I knew his mother, Maria Crowfeather, before he was born. We were cousins, both from the same band. When she married Samuel Crowfeather, some of our people were angry. They said she was betraying her heritage by marrying a white man. Elena found herself leaning forward, hungry for information about the family she was about to join. What did you think? I thought Maria was the bravest woman I knew, the housekeeper replied without hesitation. Samuel Crowfeather was a good man who loved her truly. Love like that doesn't come often, and it doesn't ask permission from society. Was their marriage happy? Maria was quiet for a moment, and Elena heard her hands smoothing her apron. Happy and difficult, both at the same time. The white ranchers didn't trust Samuel after he married an Apache woman. The Apache didn't trust Maria after she married a white man. They built their happiness inside their own home, with their own family. Elena absorbed this information while eating the breakfast Maria had prepared: fresh eggs, bacon, and bread that was still warm from the oven. The food was better than anything she had eaten in months, but she found her appetite diminished by growing anxiety about the wedding that was now only 7 days away. "Maria," Elena said carefully, "what is Mr. Crowfeather hoping to gain from this marriage? I understand it's a practical arrangement, but I don't understand what I bring to it besides my willingness to accept it." The older woman sighed, a sound that carried years of watching people struggle with forces beyond their control. Joseph has built a successful ranch, but success brings its own problems. There are people who want what he has: his land, his cattle, his mining claims. Some of them are willing to use violence to get it. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of violence? Cattle stolen in the night, fences cut, workers threatened. 3 months ago, someone burned down one of the line shacks where the cowboys sleep during roundup season. Maria's voice grew hard. Joseph needs allies, people who will stand with him against those who want to drive him out. A wife gives him respectability, connections to the white community through marriage. "But I don't have connections," Elena protested. "I'm nobody important." "You're white," Maria said bluntly. "In this territory, that matters. A marriage, too. A white woman, even one without family influence, makes Joseph seem more acceptable to people who might otherwise oppose him." Elena set down her fork, her appetite completely gone. She was beginning to understand that her value in this arrangement wasn't personal, it was purely symbolic. She represented a bridge between Joseph's world and the white society that had the power to destroy everything he had built. "There's something else," Maria continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "There are rumors that the territorial government is planning to seize Apache landholdings, even those legally owned by people like Joseph. A white wife might make it harder for them to justify taking his property." The full scope of what Elena was walking into began to crystallize. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience. It was a strategic alliance in what might become a war for survival. Joseph wasn't looking for a wife so much as he was looking for armor against a hostile world. That afternoon, true to his word, Joseph came to escort Elena around the ranch. As they walked, he described what she couldn't see with the detail of someone who genuinely loved his land. "The main house sits on a rise overlooking the valley," he explained as they stood on the front porch. "To the north, you can see the Chiricahua Mountains. On clear days, the peaks look close enough to touch. To the south, the grassland rolls for miles, broken up by mesquite and oak groves." Elena tilted her face toward the sun, feeling its warmth, and trying to imagine the vista Joseph was describing. "It sounds beautiful." "It is," Joseph said simply. "My father chose this spot because it has everything a ranch needs: water, grass, shelter from the worst weather. But also because it's defensible." The word defensible sent another shiver through Elena, even in his descriptions of beauty. Joseph was thinking like someone under siege. They walked to the horse paddocks, where Elena heard the snorts and whinnies of what sounded like dozens of animals. Joseph introduced her to his favorite mare, a gentle horse named Sage, who allowed Elena to stroke her neck and feel the softness of her muzzle. "Do you ride?" Joseph asked. "I never learned," Elena admitted. "Constance always said it was too dangerous for someone like me. Would you like to learn? Sage is very calm, and I could teach you." Elena was surprised by the offer. "You would do that?" "Why wouldn't I? This will be your home, too. You should be able to enjoy it fully." As they continued their tour, Elena met some of the ranch hands, a mixture of Mexican vaqueros, former soldiers, and men whose backgrounds Joseph didn't elaborate on. They all treated her with respectful courtesy, but she sensed they were reserving judgment until they saw how she handled ranch life. One man stood out from the others. His name was Tom Bridger, and unlike the others, he spoke to Elena as if her blindness was irrelevant. "Ma'am," he said when Joseph introduced them, "I understand you'll be staying with us permanent-like after the wedding. If you need anything at all, you just let me know." There was something in Tom's voice that suggested he meant more than routine hospitality. After he walked away, Elena asked Joseph about him. "Tom was a scout for the Army during the Apache campaigns," Joseph explained. "He got tired of the killing and came to work for me about 5 years ago. He's useful to have around when there's trouble." Elena was beginning to understand that everyone on the Crow Feather Ranch had been chosen for reasons that went beyond their ability to work cattle. Joseph was building more than a ranch. He was building a fortress, staffed with people who could fight if necessary. That evening, as they sat on the porch listening to the sounds of night settling over the valley, Elena decided to ask the question that had been troubling her all day. "Joseph, are you in danger? Real, immediate danger?" Joseph was quiet for so long that Elena wondered if he had heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness that made him sound older than his years. "There's a man named Crawford Blackwood who wants this ranch. He owns most of the territory between here and Tucson, and he doesn't like having what he considers an Indian operation in the middle of his domain." "What does he want to do about it?" "He's tried buying me out, offering far less than the land is worth. When that didn't work, he started the harassment campaign, stolen cattle, damaged property, threats against my workers. Now he's talking to territorial politicians about having my land grants reviewed." Elena felt a knot forming in her stomach. What would happen if he succeeded? "I would lose everything," Joseph said simply. "The ranch, the cattle, the mining claims. 25 years of my family's work would disappear into Blackwood's empire. And marrying me is supposed to prevent that?" Joseph turned toward her, and Elena could feel the intensity of his gaze, even though she couldn't see it. "Marrying you makes it harder for Blackwood to portray me as a hostile Indian who doesn't belong in civilized society. It gives me standing in the white community, people who might speak up if he tries to steal my land through legal manipulation." Elena absorbed this information, understanding finally why Joseph had been willing to pay such an enormous sum for a bride. He wasn't buying a wife, he was buying legitimacy, respectability, a shield against the forces trying to destroy him. "What if it doesn't work?" she asked. "What if marrying me doesn't give you the protection you need?" Joseph's laugh was short and bitter. "Then we'll find out whether Tom Bridger and the others are as good with guns as they were in their previous careers." That night, Elena lay awake thinking about the conversation. She had agreed to this marriage believing she was trading her freedom for security, but now she understood that security was exactly what Joseph couldn't guarantee. She was walking into a situation that might explode into violence at any moment. The next morning brought a visitor that confirmed Elena's worst fears. She was in the kitchen with Maria, learning to make bread, when they heard horses approaching at speed. Through the window, Maria could see 3 riders coming hard toward the ranch house. "Joseph!" Maria called out the back door. "Riders coming. Fast!" Elena heard Joseph's boots on the porch boards. Then Tom Bridger's voice. "That's Billy Santos and two of the other boys from the south pasture. Something's wrong." The riders pulled up in a cloud of dust, their horses lathered and blowing hard. Elena could hear the urgency in their voices even before she understood their words. "Mr. Crowfeather," one of them called out, "they hit the south herd last night. Took about 50 head and killed Miguel when he tried to stop them." Elena felt. Maria stiffened beside her. Miguel had been one of the vaqueros she had met the day before, a young man with a quick smile and gentle manner with the horses. Joseph's voice, when he responded, was deadly calm. "How many of them?" "At least 6, maybe." "More. They left Miguel where he fell and drove the cattle south toward Blackwood's range." "Any of them leave calling cards?" "Found this nailed to a tree near Miguel's body," one of the riders said. And Elena heard the rustle of paper being unfolded. Joseph read aloud. "Indian cattle don't belong on white land. Next time we'll take more than cows." The silence that followed was filled with rage so intense Elena could feel it radiating from every man present. Miguel hadn't just been killed. He had been murdered as a message, a warning designed to terrorize Joseph into abandoning his ranch. "Tom," Joseph said quietly, "get the men together. We're going to have a conversation with Mr. Blackwood." "Joseph." "No," the voice belonged to an older man Elena hadn't met. "You ride onto Blackwood's land with guns, and he'll have the sheriff declaring you an outlaw inside of a week. That's exactly what he wants. Then what do you suggest, Jim?" "Let him pick. US off one by one until there's nobody left to defend the ranch." Elena listened to the debate that followed, understanding that she was witnessing the moment when Joseph's careful strategy of building respectability through marriage might collapse into the very violence he had been trying to avoid. As the men argued, Elena made a decision that surprised even her. She stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the porch where they were gathered. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "I have a suggestion." The conversation stopped abruptly. Elena could feel their attention focused on her, some curious, some skeptical that a blind woman could contribute anything useful to their discussion of ranch warfare. "What if we moved the wedding up?" Elena continued. "What if we got married tomorrow instead of waiting another week?" Joseph's voice was puzzled. "Elena, I don't see how that would help the current situation." "Think about it," Elena said, warming to her idea. "Right now, I'm just a woman visiting your ranch. But if I'm your wife, if we're married, then any attack on this ranch becomes an attack on a married white woman. That changes everything." Tom Bridger spoke up, approval evident in his voice. "She's right. Blackwood can justify attacking an Indian ranch, but attacking a white woman's home, that's different. More than that," Elena continued, "we could invite people to the wedding. Important people from town, maybe even some of the territorial officials. Make it an event that gets talked about, remembered. It becomes much harder for those same people to ignore what Blackwood is doing if they've just celebrated at your table." Joseph was quiet for a long moment. That single quote's actually very clever. "But Elena, are you sure? Once we're married, you're committed to this fight. There's no going back to Silver Creek if things get worse." Elena thought about Constance, about the boarding house, about the life of dependence and contempt she would be returning to if she walked away now. Then she thought about Miguel, a young man she had barely known, but who had died simply for working at this ranch. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "Let's get married tomorrow." As the men dispersed to make preparations for both the accelerated wedding and increased security measures, Elena remained on the porch with Joseph. For the first time since she had arrived at the ranch, they were truly alone together. "Elena," Joseph said quietly, "I want you to understand what you're committing to. This fight with Blackwood is going to get worse before it gets better. People may die. You could be putting yourself in real danger." Elena turned toward the sound of his voice. "Joseph, I've been in danger my entire life. At least here, I'm choosing the danger I face instead of having it chosen for me." Joseph was quiet for a moment. Then she felt his hand cover hers where it rested on the porch railing. "Thank you," he said simply. For the first time since this whole arrangement had begun, Elena felt like she was making a choice based on her own values, rather than simply accepting what others decided for her. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Joseph. Crow feather. But tonight, for the first time in years, she felt like Elena Morrison was someone worth being. The 24 hours between Elena's decision and her wedding day passed in a whirlwind of activity that left no time for second thoughts. Maria worked with 3 other women from the nearby settlement to transform the ranch house's main room into something suitable for a ceremony, while Tom Bridger and the ranch hands took turns writing to distant neighbors with hastily written invitations. Elena found herself at the center of preparations she could hear but not see. The sound of furniture being moved, rugs being beaten clean, and flowers being arranged filled the house. Through it all, Joseph moved with the focused intensity of a military commander preparing for battle, which, Elena was beginning to realize, was exactly what he was doing. "The justice of the peace from Wilcox will be here by noon," Joseph told her as they shared a quick breakfast. "Judge Henderson from Tucson is riding out with his wife. They should arrive this morning. Sheriff Morrison from Silver Creek is coming, along with Mayor Walsh and his family." Elena paused with her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "Sheriff Morrison? Isn't that no relation to you as far as I know," Joseph said, "though the name similarity might work in our favor. People tend to assume connections even when they don't exist." The strategy behind the guest list was becoming clear. Joseph had invited every person of influence he could reach on short notice, creating a gathering of witnesses whose presence would make it politically costly for Blackwood to continue his attacks. A wedding was supposed to be a celebration, but this one felt more like a declaration of war, disguised as a social event. Dr. Margaret Whitmore arrived mid-morning, a surprise guest that Joseph hadn't mentioned. Elena heard her voice before the introductions, crisp, educated, with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. "Miss Morrison," Dr. Whitmore said when Joseph brought her over, "I'm delighted to meet you. I've heard remarkable things about your courage." Elena was puzzled. "My courage? I'm afraid I don't understand." "Joseph tells me you're choosing to build a life here despite the challenges facing this ranch. That takes considerable bravery." Elena realized that Joseph had been carefully shaping the narrative about their marriage, presenting her as a woman making a bold choice rather than someone trapped by circumstances. It was a subtle but important distinction that would affect how the community viewed both of them. "Dr. Whitmore runs the Territorial Medical Service," Joseph explained. "She's also the wife of Territorial Judge Whitmore." The significance of this connection wasn't lost on Elena. Joseph was assembling not just witnesses to their marriage, but a network of influential people whose presence would provide protection against legal and political attacks. As the morning progressed, Elena began to understand the true scale of what Joseph had accomplished in just one day. The sound of arriving carriages created a steady rhythm, punctuated by voices calling greetings and the organized chaos of a major social event coming together. Constance arrived in a hired buggy just before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Elena heard her stepmother's voice in the courtyard, pitched higher than usual with excitement and what sounded like alcohol-enhanced confidence. "My dear Elena," Constance gushed when she found her stepdaughter in the bedroom where she was finishing her preparations, "you look absolutely radiant. I knew this marriage would be perfect for you." Elena bit back her first response, which would have pointed out that Constance had forced this marriage without Elena's consent. Instead, she focused on the practicalities of the moment. "Constance, I need you to understand something. This ranch is my home now. After today, decisions about my life will be made by Joseph and me, not by you." Constance's laugh was forced and brittle. "Of course, dear. You're becoming a married woman. Though I do hope you'll remember how much I've sacrificed to ensure your happiness." The ceremony itself was held in the main room of the ranch house, with guests spilling out onto the porch and into the courtyard. Elena could hear the murmur of at least 50 people, far more than she had expected for such short notice. Judge Henderson, a man with a voice that carried the authority of years on the territorial bench, performed the ceremony with appropriate solemnity. As Elena spoke her vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish Joseph Crowfeather, she found herself meaning the words more than she had expected. When Joseph placed the ring on her finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, Elena felt the weight of more than just jewelry. She was accepting not just marriage, but partnership in whatever battles lay ahead. "You may kiss the bride," Judge Henderson announced, and Elena felt Joseph's hands gentle on her face as he leaned down to press his lips to hers. The kiss was brief and formal, appropriate for their audience, but Elena detected something warmer underneath the public display. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Elena had experienced. The ranch hands had barbecued beef, and the neighbor women had contributed dishes that filled several tables. There was music, someone had brought a fiddle, and Maria surprised everyone by producing a guitar and singing songs in both Spanish and Apache that told stories of love, loss, and endurance. Elena found herself surrounded by well-wishers, whose congratulations carried undercurrents of political meaning. Mayor Walsh from Silver Creek spoke at length about the importance of bringing good families together across cultural lines. Judge Henderson made a toast about the strength that came from unity in the face of adversity. Even Sheriff Morrison, a taciturn man who seemed uncomfortable at social gatherings, made a point of congratulating Joseph on his wise choice in a wife. But it was Dr. Whitmore who provided the most valuable gift of the day. As the afternoon festivities began to wind down, she approached Elena with a proposal. "Mrs. Crowfeather," she said, the new name still sounding strange to Elena's ears, "I wonder if you might be interested in some part-time work. The Territorial Medical Service is always in need of people who can assist with record-keeping and patient care. Your unique perspective might be particularly valuable in dealing with certain types of patients." Elena was intrigued. What kind of patients? Soldiers and civilians who have lost their sight due to injury or illness. Many of them struggle with despair, feeling that their lives are over. Someone like you, who has built a successful life, despite visual impairment, could provide hope and practical guidance. The offer was more than just employment. It was recognition of Elena's capabilities and a chance to contribute something meaningful to her community. More importantly, it would give her connections and influence independent of her marriage to Joseph. "I would be very interested," Elena replied. "When would I start? Next month, perhaps?" It would only require traveling to Tucson once or twice a month, staying for a few days each time. "Joseph, would you have any objection to your wife taking on such responsibilities?" Elena held her breath, waiting for Joseph's response. This was the first test of whether their marriage would be a true partnership or simply a more comfortable form of captivity. "Elena can make her own decisions about how she wants to spend her time," Joseph said, without hesitation. "If she wants to work with Dr. Whitmore, she has my full support." As the last guests departed in the golden light of late afternoon, Elena and Joseph found themselves alone on the porch where they had sat the night before. Everything had changed, yet the mountains and valleys around them remained constant. "Well, Mrs. Crowfeather," Joseph said, and Elena could hear the smile in his voice, "how does it feel to be married?" "Different than I expected," Elena admitted. "Better, in some ways. Only in some ways?" Elena considered her answer carefully. "I'm grateful for the respect you've shown me, for treating me as a partner rather than a burden. But I can't help wondering if Blackwood is going to let this strategy work, or if we've just made ourselves bigger targets. As if summoned by her words, Tom Bridger appeared at the edge of the porch. "Joseph, we've got riders coming from the south. Moving slow, but there's a lot of them." Elena felt Joseph tense beside her. "How many?" "Hard to say in this light, but at least a dozen, maybe more." Joseph stood, his hand briefly touching Elena's shoulder. "Elena, I want you to go inside with Maria. Stay away from the windows." "No," Elena said firmly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I'm not hiding. We just declared to everyone that I'm part of this ranch now. I need to act like it." Joseph was quiet for a moment. "All right. But stay behind me, and if shooting starts, get down and stay down." The riders approached slowly, their horses' hooves creating a steady drumbeat that seemed to match Elena's heartbeat. As they drew closer, Elena could make out individual voices, rough, confident men who spoke with the casual arrogance of people accustomed to intimidating others. "Evening, Crowfeather," called a voice from the group's leader. "Heard you had yourself a wedding today. Thought we'd come by to offer congratulations." Joseph's response was carefully neutral. "Mr. Blackwood, how thoughtful of you." So this was Crawford Blackwood himself, Elena realized. The man whose greed and prejudice had set all these events in motion. His voice was cultured, educated, with just enough of a southern accent to suggest aristocratic origins. He sounded like a man who considered himself a gentleman even while ordering murders. "Quite a gathering you had here today," Blackwood continued. "Judge Henderson, Dr. Whitmore, several other prominent citizens. You've certainly made yourself popular lately." "A man's wedding should be celebrated by his friends and neighbors," Joseph replied evenly. "Indeed it should. And I'm sure your new bride will bring you great happiness. Though I do hope she understands the challenges of life out here. Terrible things can happen to isolated ranch families. Accidents, you understand. Fires. Sometimes people just disappear." Elena felt ice form in her stomach. Blackwood wasn't even bothering to disguise his threats. The presence of a dozen armed riders at their home on their wedding night was itself a message. "Mr. Blackwood," Elena said, stepping forward despite Joseph's restraining hand, "thank you for your concern about my welfare. I'm sure a man of your standing in the community would want to ensure that nothing unfortunate happens to any territorial citizens, regardless of their heritage." There was a moment of silence as Blackwood processed the implications of Elena's words. She had just reminded him that she was a white woman, that any harm that came to her would be viewed differently by the law than violence against Joseph or his workers. "Of course, Mrs. Crowfeather," Blackwood said finally, his voice carrying a note of grudging respect. "I'm always concerned about the welfare of our community's families. I do hope you'll find our territory welcoming." "I'm sure I will," Elena replied. "My husband and I plan to be active members of the community for many years to come." After Blackwood and his men rode away, Elena and Joseph remained on the porch in the gathering darkness. The confrontation had been brief but significant, the first direct test of their new strategy. "That was well done," Joseph said quietly. "You made him think twice about his options. Did I? Or did I just make him angrier?" "Both, probably. But Elena, you made him realize that attacking us isn't going to be as simple as he thought. He expected to intimidate a frightened bride. Instead, he met someone willing to stand up to him." Elena felt a mixture of pride and terror. She had found her voice, but she had also painted a target on herself. The game they were playing had no rules except survival, and the stakes kept getting higher. "Joseph," she said as they prepared to go inside, "what happens now? Now we wait and see if our gamble worked. If the people who came to our wedding today remember their obligations when Blackwood comes calling. If the law will protect us when we need it. If we've bought enough time to build the alliances we need to survive. And if we haven't, Joseph's hand found hers in the darkness. Then we find out what Tom Bridger and the others learned in their previous careers. As they entered the house that was now truly their home, Elena reflected on how much her life had changed in just 24 hours. She had awakened as Elena Morrison, a blind woman with no choices and no future. She was ending the day as Elena Crowfeather, a ranch wife with enemies, allies, and the beginning of a purpose larger than herself. The transformation was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. For the first time in her life, Elena was choosing her own battles. The question now was whether she was strong enough to win them. The morning after Elena's wedding dawned with an eerie stillness that made every sound seem amplified. She woke alone in the bedroom she now shared with Joseph, though they had maintained separate beds by mutual agreement. The smell of smoke drifted through the open window, not the pleasant scent of breakfast cooking, but something harsher and more acrid. Elena dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Maria standing at the window with her hands pressed flat against the glass. "What is it?" Elena asked, though the tension in Maria's posture already told her the answer wouldn't be good. "The north pasture," Maria said quietly. "They burned the grass during the night. 300 acres, maybe more." Elena felt her stomach drop. She understood enough about ranching to know that destroying pasture land was more than just harassment. It was economic warfare designed to starve the cattle and force Joseph to sell at a loss. Joseph's voice came from the doorway behind them. "Tom's already taken a crew out to assess the damage. The fire lines held where we cut them last year, so it could have been worse." "How much worse?" Elena asked. "If the wind had been different, they could have burned the ranch house and killed us all in our sleep," Joseph replied bluntly. "This was a warning, Elena. Blackwood is showing us what he can do when he wants to." Elena poured coffee with hands that trembled slightly. The romantic notion of standing up to bullies was one thing. The reality of waking up to find your livelihood literally going up in smoke was quite another. "What's our next move?" she asked, surprised to hear herself using the word "our" so naturally. Joseph sat down at the kitchen table, his face showing the strain of a man who had slept little and worried much. "We document everything, take photographs if we can, get statements from the hands who saw the fires. Then we send a report to Sheriff Morrison and hope he's willing to investigate. And if he isn't, then we start considering alternatives." Elena was beginning to understand that alternatives in this context meant violence, a possibility that terrified her even as she recognized it might be inevitable. Dr. Whitmore arrived unexpectedly that afternoon, her medical bag in hand and her expression grim. She had heard about the fire from travelers on the road and had come to check on the newlyweds. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she told Elena as they sat in the parlor. "Blackwood is escalating because he can't tolerate the idea that your marriage strategy might actually work." "Is it working?" Elena asked. "More than you might think. Judge Henderson sent a telegraph to the territorial capital this morning requesting a formal investigation into the harassment of prominent territorial citizens. That's you and Joseph. In case you were wondering." Elena felt a flutter of hope. "Does that mean help is coming?" Dr. Whitmore's expression remained troubled. "It means the territorial government is aware of the situation. Whether they'll actually do anything about it depends on how much political pressure Blackwood can bring to bear and how many officials he has in his pocket." "How many does he have?" "More than we'd like, fewer than he thinks he needs," Dr. Whitmore replied cryptically. "The key is making sure the cost of ignoring this situation becomes higher than the cost of addressing it." That evening, Elena and Joseph received an unexpected visitor. Constance arrived in the same hired buggy she had used for the wedding, but her demeanor was entirely different. Gone was the artificial cheer and social climbing. In its place was naked fear. "Elena," Constance said without preamble, "you need to leave this place. Pack your things and come back to Silver Creek with me tonight." Elena was taken aback by her stepmother's urgency. "Constance, what's happened?" "I've been hearing things in town. Rumors about what Blackwood is planning. People are saying he's not going to stop with burning grass, that he's preparing for something much worse." Joseph joined them in the parlor, his expression carefully neutral. "What exactly are people saying, Mrs. Morrison?" Constance looked between Elena and Joseph, clearly uncomfortable with addressing him directly. "They're saying he's hired men from outside the territory, gunfighters, people who don't care about local politics or consequences." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. The game they had been playing with lawyers and politicians was about to become something much deadlier. "Constance," Elena said carefully, "why are you warning us? Yesterday you were celebrating this marriage. What changed?" Constance was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a note of something Elena had never heard from her before: genuine remorse. "I was thinking about the money, Elena, about being free of debt and having enough to live comfortably. I didn't realize what I was sending you into. So now you want to rescue me?" "I want to keep you alive," Constance said bluntly. "Money doesn't do me any good if you're dead, and from what I'm hearing, that's where this is heading." Elena looked toward Joseph, though she couldn't see his expression. "What do you think?" "I think your stepmother is probably right about the escalation," Joseph said quietly. "Blackwood has run out of subtle options. The question is whether running away will keep you safe or just delay the inevitable." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if you leave now, Blackwood wins. He gets my land, my cattle, everything my family built. And what's to stop him from coming after you later if he decides you're still a threat?" Elena understood the logic, but the prospect of staying to face professional gunfighters was almost overwhelming. She was blind, untrained in violence, and completely dependent on others for protection. What possible good could she do in a gunfight? "There's something else," Joseph continued. "If you leave now, it sends a message to everyone who supported us. Judge Henderson, Dr. Whitmore, all the people who came to our wedding. It tells them that we're not worth defending, that Blackwood's intimidation works." Constance stood up abruptly. "This is insane. Elena, you're talking about staying to fight trained killers over a piece of land. It's not worth your life." "Isn't it?" Elena asked, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Constance, for the first time in my life, I'm part of something important. People respect me here. I have work to do, a purpose beyond just surviving from day to day. Why would I give that up to go back to being your burden in a boarding house?" Constance recoiled as if she had been slapped. "You were never a burden." "Yes, I was," Elena interrupted. "And we both know it. You made it clear every day for 3 years. At least here, if I die, it will be while fighting for something I believe in rather than while waiting for charity from someone who resents my existence." The silence that followed was broken by Tom Bridger's voice from the porch. "Joseph, we've got company again." Different company this time. Elena heard Joseph move to the window. Sheriff Morrison and 2 deputies, armed but not looking for trouble. "Sheriff." Morrison's visit proved to be both encouraging and frustrating. He had come to investigate the fire, but his questions and observations made it clear that he was more interested in documenting the incident than in actually pursuing the perpetrators. "Well, Mr. Crowfeather," the sheriff said after examining the burned pasture, "it's definitely arson. No question about that. But proving who did it is going to be another matter entirely." "Sheriff," Elena said, "everyone in the territory knows who's behind this harassment. Are you saying there's nothing you can do?" Sheriff Morrison removed his hat and ran his fingers through his graying hair. "Mrs. Crowfeather, I'm saying that Crawford Blackwood is a careful man who doesn't leave evidence. Even if I arrested him tomorrow, he'd be out on bail before sunset, and I'd be looking for a new job before the week was over. So he's above the law. He's not above the law, Sheriff Morrison replied carefully, but he has enough influence to make enforcing the law complicated. Joseph spoke up. Sheriff, what would it take to get territorial marshals involved? Federal authorities? Evidence of a federal crime. Interstate commerce violations, maybe mail tampering, something that gives them jurisdiction. Right now, this is all local cattle rustling and property damage. After the sheriff left, Elena found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time since the wedding. She walked out to the garden behind the house, a space Maria had told her was filled with roses, herbs, and vegetables. The scents were wonderful, but Elena found herself focusing on the sounds wind through the grass, cattle in the distance, and somewhere closer, the soft footsteps of guards Tom Bridger had posted around the ranch house. Constance found her there as the sun was setting. Elena, I'm leaving in the morning. This is your last chance to come with me. Elena didn't turn around. I know. You're really going to stay? Even knowing what's coming? Especially knowing what's coming, Elena replied. Constance, do you remember what my mother used to say about courage? Constance was quiet for a moment. She said courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being afraid and doing what was right anyway. Joseph and his family built something good here. They treat people fairly. They contribute to the community. They hurt nobody. If I run away now, I'm saying that greed and violence should win just because they're scary. And if you stay and get killed? Elena turned toward her stepmother's voice. Then at least I'll die as Elena Crowfeather, someone who mattered instead of Elena Morrison, someone who was just in the way. Constance left the next morning without another word, but Elena found an envelope on the kitchen table with her name on it. Inside was the deed to the small house in Silver Creek that had belonged to Elena's parents, along with a note in Constance's handwriting, in case you change your mind. You always have a place to go. Elena folded the deed carefully and put it in her jewelry box next to Mrs. Cheen's jade pendant. She had no intention of using either one, but somehow having them made her feel stronger. That afternoon brought news. That changed everything. Tom Bridger rode in with a report that made Elena's blood run cold. There's a man in Silver Creek asking questions about Elena, Tom told Joseph. Professional type, dressed like a businessman but carrying iron like a gunfighter. He's been talking to people at the boarding house, the dress shop, anywhere Elena used to go. What kind of questions? Elena asked. Personal things. Your habits, your schedule when you lived there, who you talked to, where you felt safe. The kind of information someone would need to get close to you. Elena felt ice form in her stomach. He's not planning to attack the ranch directly. He's planning to kidnap me. Joseph was quiet for a long moment. That would make sense tactically. Taking you hostage would force me to negotiate, probably on terms that favor Blackwood. And if something went wrong... He didn't finish the sentence, but Elena understood. If she were killed during a kidnapping attempt, it could be blamed on criminals rather than on Blackwood directly. We need to change our security arrangements, Tom said. Can't have Elena riding around the territory alone anymore, and she shouldn't be in the house without armed guards. Elena felt the walls of her new freedom starting to close in around her. I'm supposed to start working with Dr. Whitmore next week. I can't do that if I'm a prisoner in my own home. Maybe you should postpone, Joseph began. No, Elena said. Firmly, if I stop living my life, Blackwood wins without having to fire a shot. We find a way to make the trip safely, or we bring Dr. Whitmore here to work. Tom Bridger smiled, a sound Elena could hear in his voice. Ma'am, I like the way you think. Give me a couple days to work out the details, and we'll figure out how to keep you safe while you do your job. That night, as Elena and Joseph sat on their porch listening to the sounds of armed guards walking their property, Elena reflected on how quickly her life had become something unrecognizable. A week ago, her biggest worry had been avoiding Constance's bad moods. Now she was planning her work schedule around the possibility of assassination attempts. "Joseph," she said quietly, "do you ever regret marrying me? All this trouble might have been avoided if you had chosen someone else." Joseph was quiet for so long that Alina wondered if he had heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a warmth she was still learning to recognize. "Elena, I've been thinking about that. The truth is, any marriage would have provoked Blackwood eventually. The difference is that with someone else, I might have been trying to protect a wife who couldn't protect herself. With you, I'm fighting alongside a partner who's as committed to this battle as I am. Even though I can't shoot." "Especially because you can't shoot," Joseph replied. "Anyone can learn to handle a gun. Not everyone can stand up to Crawford Blackwood and make him blink." Elena smiled, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. "I suppose we'll find out just how much backbone I really have." "I think we already have," Joseph said softly. "The question now is whether it's enough to see us through what's coming." As if summoned by his words, Tom Bridger appeared at the edge of the porch with news that confirmed their worst fears. "Joseph, we just got word from town. That gunfighter asking about Elena? He's not alone. 3 more men arrived this afternoon, all cut from the same cloth. They're staying at Murphy's saloon and making no effort to hide what they are." Elena felt her newfound confidence waver. 4 professional killers, all focused on her. The game was about to become deadly serious, and she was about to discover whether courage was enough to keep her alive. Elena woke before dawn to the sound of urgent whispers outside her bedroom window. Through the thin walls, she could hear Tom Bridger's voice, tense and controlled, speaking to Joseph in words too low to distinguish. Whatever news he brought, it was serious enough to warrant waking the household before sunrise. She dressed quickly and found them in the kitchen, huddled over coffee and a hand-drawn map spread across the table. Maria stood by the stove, her usually composed demeanor betrayed by the way her hands shook as she prepared breakfast. "What's happened?" Elena asked, though the atmosphere in the room already told her she wouldn't like the answer. Joseph looked up from the map, his face grim. In the lamplight, "The gunfighters left Silver Creek last night. All 4 of them, riding this direction." Elena felt her mouth go dry. "How do you know?" "Mrs. Chun's daughter May rode out here in the dark to warn us," Tom explained. "Brave girl, making that trip. Alone." She overheard them talking at Murphy's saloon about collecting the package before dawn. The euphemism chilled Elena to the bone. She wasn't a person to these men, she was cargo to be delivered. "Where are they now?" Elena asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Unknown," Tom replied. "They could be anywhere between here and town. That's why we need to move you, and we need to move you now." Joseph stood up from the table, his decision already made. "Tom's right. We're taking you to the line shack up in Miller's Canyon. It's defensible, and they'll never find it unless they know exactly where to look." Elena felt a familiar surge of rebellion against being managed and protected without consultation. "What about my work with Dr. Whitmore? I'm supposed to travel to Tucson tomorrow." "Elena," Joseph said gently, "Dr. Whitmore will understand. Right now staying alive is more important than keeping appointments." "Is it?" Elena challenged. "If I hide every time Blackwood threatens me, what message does that send? How long before every territorial citizen with inconvenient property gets intimidated into running away?" Tom Bridger spoke up, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had survived many dangerous situations. "Ma'am, I respect what you're trying to do, but dead martyrs don't help anybody. Let's keep breathing first, then worry about making statements." Elena was about to argue further when Maria approached with a cup of coffee and a quiet observation that changed everything. "Elena," Maria said softly, "what if this is exactly what they want? What if making you hide is part of their plan?" Elena paused with the coffee cup halfway to her lips. "What do you mean?" "Think about it," Maria continued. If you disappear, people will assume you ran away. All those important people who came to your wedding will think you abandoned Joseph when things got difficult. It destroys everything you accomplished. Elena felt the pieces clicking into place. But if I keep to my schedule, if I travel to Tucson, as planned ... You force them to either attack you in public, which would cause a scandal, or follow you into territory where they don't control the law enforcement, Joseph finished. Understanding dawning in his voice. Tom Bridger looked between them with a growing alarm. Now hold on. You're talking about using Elena as bait. That's a hell of a risk to take. Everything we do now is a risk, Elena replied. The question is which risk gives us the best chance of winning this fight. Joseph studied the map for a long moment. Tom, how many men can you spare for escort duty? 4, maybe 5 if we pull everyone in from the outer ranges. And Dr. Whitmore will have her own security arrangements in Tucson? She mentioned that Judge Whitmore always travels with territorial marshals when he's on circuit business. Elena added. Joseph made his decision. We do both. Elena keeps her appointment with Dr. Whitmore, but we make sure she's protected every step of the way. And we make sure everyone knows she's traveling under territorial protection. The next several hours passed in a blur of preparations that reminded Elena of military operations she had heard veterans describe. Tom Bridger selected his escort team based on criteria that had nothing to do with their cattle handling skills and everything to do with their ability to kill efficiently if necessary. Elena found herself being fitted with a vest that, Maria explained, was lined with steel plates, crude but effective protection against gunfire. The weight was uncomfortable, but Elena found it oddly reassuring to have something solid between herself and the bullets that might be coming her way. Mrs. Crowfeather, said a voice she didn't recognize, I'm Charlie Nguyen. I'll be riding on your escort today. Elena turned toward the voice, trying to place the accent. Mr. Nguyen, you're Vietnamese? Yes, ma'am. Came here after the French. Troubles in my country. Tom Bridger gave me work when nobody else would hire a foreigner. Elena understood immediately why Tom had chosen Charlie Nguyen for this mission. A man who had fled political violence in his homeland would understand exactly what they were fighting against. The journey to Tucson began before full daylight, with Elena riding in a reinforced wagon between Charlie Nguyen and a silent man named Frank Morrison, no relation to Sheriff Morrison, despite the name. Tom Bridger rode ahead as scout, while 2 more men brought up the rear. For the first few hours, the trip proceeded without incident. Elena found herself almost enjoying the motion of the wagon and the conversation with Charlie, who proved to be well-educated and surprisingly well-read for a ranch hand. Mr. Nguyen, Elena said as they navigated a particularly rough stretch of road, what do you think about our chances of reaching Tucson safely? Charlie was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Crowfeather, in my experience, men who hunt other people for money are usually cowards at heart. They prefer easy targets and simple situations. You are neither. How am I not an easy target? I can't even see danger coming. That's exactly why you're difficult, Charlie replied. Most people depend on their eyes to tell them about danger. When your eyes fail, you get frightened and make mistakes. But you've never depended on your eyes, so you don't panic when you can't see threats. That makes you much harder to predict. Elena had never thought about her blindness as a tactical advantage, but Charlie's logic made sense. She had spent her entire life navigating uncertainty and potential danger. In some ways, she was better prepared for this situation than someone who relied on sight for security. The attack came at midday, when they were crossing a narrow valley between 2 rocky ridges. Elena heard Tom Bridger's warning shout just seconds before the first rifle shots cracked across the desert air. Down! Charlie yelled, pushing Elena to the floor of the wagon as bullets whined overhead. Elena found herself pressed against the wooden planks, her heart hammering so hard she could barely hear the gunfire erupting around them. The steel-lined vest felt inadequate against the violence overhead, but she forced herself to stay calm and listen to the battle developing around her. 4 shooters on the north ridge, Frank Morrison called out. 2 more behind those rocks to the south. Charlie, get the wagon moving. Tom Bridger's voice carried clearly despite the gunfire. Frank, stay with Elena. Everyone else, give them something to think about. The wagon lurched into motion as Charlie whipped the horses into a gallop. Elena felt every bump and rut in the road as they raced through the valley, gunfire continuing behind them. How far to cover? Elena shouted. Over the noise. 1/2 mile to the ridgeline, Charlie replied, his voice tight with concentration. There's a stage station there with telegraph connections. Elena understood immediately. If they could reach the station, they could send word to territorial authorities about the attack. That would transform this from a private dispute into an official incident requiring government response. The wagon hit a deep rut and Elena was thrown against the side, her shoulder slamming into the steel reinforcement with painful force. But she could hear the gunfire fading behind them, which meant they were pulling away from their attackers. Charlie, she called out, are our men following us? Tom and 2 others are right behind us. The other 2 are keeping the shooters busy. Elena felt a knot of worry form in her stomach. Men were risking their lives to protect her, and some of them might not survive the day. The stage station appeared ahead, a low adobe building surrounded by a wooden fence, with telegraph wires stretching toward the horizon. Charlie drove the wagon through the gate at full speed, pulling up in a cloud of dust beside the main building. Inside, ma'am, Frank Morrison said, helping Elena down from the wagon. Let's get you behind some real walls. The station master, a grizzled man named Pete Sullivan, took one look at their armed escort and the distant gunfire and immediately understood the situation. Telegraph's working, he said without preamble. Who do you want me to contact? Territorial Marshal's office in Phoenix, Elena replied. Tell them Alana Crowfeather is under attack by Crawford Blackwood's hired gunmen. Request immediate assistance. As Pete Sullivan worked the telegraph key, Elena listened to the sounds of their pursuers approaching. The gunfire had stopped, but she could hear horses moving through the valley at speed. Tom Bridger arrived with his remaining men just as Sullivan finished sending the telegram. Elena counted voices and realized with relief that everyone had survived the initial attack. They're regrouping down in the valley, Tom reported. 6 men, maybe 7. They're not giving up easy. How long until help arrives? Elena asked. Sullivan checked his pocket watch. Territorial Marshal is in Tucson today. If he starts immediately, maybe 3 hours, 4 at the outside. Elena felt the weight of that timeline. They were trapped in a small station with limited ammunition, facing professional killers who had all day to figure out how to finish their job. Tom, she said quietly, what are our realistic chances of holding out that long? Tom Bridger's answer was honest and frightening. Depends on how determined they are and how much ammunition they brought. If they're willing to take casualties, they can probably overrun us before help arrives. Elena made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Then we need to change the terms of this fight. What do you mean? Joseph asked. He had arrived with additional men from the ranch, doubling their defensive force, but also confirming how serious the situation had become. I mean, we stop letting them hunt us and start hunting them, Elena replied. Charlie was right. These men are cowards who prefer easy targets. Let's make them deal with something difficult. Frank Morrison spoke up. Ma'am, what exactly are you proposing? Elena took a deep breath, knowing her next words would either save them or get them all killed. I'm proposing that we give them exactly what they came for me, but on our terms, not theirs. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of horses moving closer and the distant crack of rifle fire as the gunfighters tested their defenses. Elena, Joseph said carefully, I hope you're not suggesting what I think you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that instead of waiting here to be picked off one by one, we make them come to us in a place where we have the advantage, and the only way to guarantee they'll come is if they think they can get what they came for. Tom Bridger was studying Elena with a mixture of admiration and concern. It could work, but it means putting you directly in harm's way. I'm already in harm's way, Elena pointed out. At least this way, I get to choose how the fight happens. As the sound of approaching horses grew louder, Elena realized that her entire life had been leading to this moment, the first time she would have complete control over her own fate, even if that fate might be death. The question now was whether the courage she had found in herself was strong enough to see her through the battle that was about to begin. Elena's proposal to turn the tables on their attackers met with immediate resistance from every man at the stage station, but she had expected that. What she hadn't expected was the quiet voice of support that came from an unexpected source. The lady's right, said Pete Sullivan, the grizzled station master. I've been watching predators hunt prey in this desert for 30 years. Soon as the prey stops running and turns to fight, everything changes. Joseph moved closer to Elena, his voice low and urgent. Elena, what exactly are you thinking? Because if you're planning to walk out there and surrender yourself, I'm not planning to surrender anything. Elena interrupted. I'm planning to win. But first, I need to understand the terrain. Pete, describe the area around this station. Sullivan seemed pleased to have his expertise requested. Well, the station sits on a flat shelf about 20 feet above the valley floor. There's a wash that runs along the base of the shelf dry most of the year, but it creates a natural trench. Behind us, the ground rises up into broken rocks and scrub brush. Elena nodded, building a mental map. How many ways are there to approach the station? Really only 2 practical routes. Up the main road from the valley or down from the rocks. Behind us, anything else would require climbing sheer walls or crossing open ground under fire. And where would you position shooters if you wanted to pin down everyone in this building? Tom Bridger answered before Sullivan could respond. The rocks behind us for elevation and the wash in front for cover. Classic crossfire position. Elena smiled, an expression that seemed incongruous given their circumstances. Then that's exactly where we want them to be. Charlie Nguyen spoke up, his voice thoughtful. You're thinking like a general, not like a victim. What's your plan? Elena moved to the center of the room, her voice taking on the authority of someone who had thought through every angle. The plan is simple. We give them what they think they want, a clear shot at capturing me, but we control where and how it happens. Elena, Joseph said firmly, I won't let you use yourself as bait. You're not letting me do anything, Elena replied with steel in her voice. I'm choosing to do it. There's a difference. Frank Morrison cleared his throat. Ma'am, assuming we go along with this idea, what exactly would you need from us? Elena had been thinking about this since the idea first occurred to her. I need someone to take a message to the gunfighters. Tell them I'm willing to negotiate, that I'll meet with their leader alone to discuss terms. But I'll only meet in a place of my choosing. Tom Bridger was already shaking his head. That's suicide, Elena. Soon as you're alone with any of them, I won't be alone, Elena interrupted. That's the beauty of it. They'll think I'm alone, but you'll all be positioned where you can intervene when the time comes. Pete Sullivan was studying Elena with growing respect. Where would you want this meeting to take place? Elena had already identified the perfect location from Sullivan's description. The wash at the base of the shelf. It provides cover for both sides, but it also limits their escape routes. More importantly, it puts them in a position where they can't see what's happening on the high ground behind them. Joseph was quiet for a long moment. You want us to let them think they have the tactical advantage while we position shooters above them. Exactly. They'll be so focused on me that they won't be watching for threats from other directions. Charlie Nguyen smiled, a sound of genuine admiration. In my country, we had a saying, the mouse that leads the cat into the snake's den is no longer a mouse. But Elena, Joseph persisted, you'd still be down there with them. If something goes wrong with this plan, I might get hurt, Elena replied. If we don't try this plan, we'll all definitely get killed when they overrun this station. I prefer my odds with the first option. The debate that followed was interrupted by the arrival of a lone rider approaching under a white flag, improvised from a torn shirt. Pete Sullivan watched through his window as the man dismounted and walked toward the station. Single rider, Sullivan reported. Tall fellow, dressed like a businessman. He's got iron on his hip, but he's not reaching for it. Elena felt her pulse quicken. That's probably their leader. Let him approach, but keep him covered. The man who entered the station moved with the careful confidence of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. His voice, when he spoke, carried a slight accent that Elena couldn't quite place. Mrs. Crowfeather, he said with elaborate courtesy. My name is Marcus Cole. I believe we have some business to discuss. Elena stood up, grateful that her steel-lined vest was hidden beneath her traveling dress. Mr. Cole, I assume you're here on behalf of Crawford Blackwood. I'm here to resolve a situation that has become unnecessarily complicated, Cole replied smoothly. Mr. Blackwood is prepared to be quite generous in exchange for your cooperation. What kind of cooperation? A simple public statement that your marriage to Joseph Crowfeather was a mistake, that you've realized you don't belong in this rough country. An amicable separation, you might say, with appropriate financial compensation for your inconvenience. Elena almost laughed at the audacity of the proposal. And if I refuse? Marcus Cole's voice hardened slightly. Mrs. Crowfeather, I have 6 men positioned around this station. Your husband has perhaps 10. Those aren't good odds for your side. Perhaps not, Elena agreed. But you're forgetting something important. What's that? You need me alive to be useful to Blackwood. We just need you dead to solve our problem. The silence that followed was pregnant with threat. Cole was clearly reassessing the situation, realizing that his prey was not behaving according to script. Mrs. Crowfeather, Cole said finally, you seem to misunderstand your position. On the contrary, I understand it perfectly. You've been hired to kidnap me because my marriage to Joseph threatens Blackwood's plans. But kidnapping only works if the victim cooperates out of fear. I'm not cooperating, and I'm not afraid. Tom Bridger spoke from his position by the window. Ma'am, we've got movement out there. His men are getting into position. Elena nodded. Mr. Cole, I'm going to make you a counteroffer. You and your men can ride away right now, tell Blackwood that the job is more complicated than you expected, and find easier work somewhere else. Cole's laugh was short and bitter. You're hardly in a position to make demands, aren't I? Let me explain something about my situation. I'm a territorial citizen who has been attacked by hired gunmen while traveling under legitimate business. A telegraph message has already been sent to the marshal's office. How long do you think before this becomes a federal matter? Elena could hear Cole shifting his weight, clearly uncomfortable with this line of reasoning. Furthermore, Elena continued, I'm a white woman married to a successful rancher, with connections to territorial judges and territorial medical services. My death or disappearance won't be ignored or covered up. It will be investigated thoroughly. Mrs. Crowfeather, Cole began. I'm not finished, Elena said firmly. You've made 2 critical mistakes, Mr. Cole. First, you assumed that a blind woman would be easy to intimidate. Second, you assumed that I had something to lose by fighting you. What do you mean? Elena smiled, an expression that seemed to unnerve Cole more than shouting would have. I mean that until very recently, I had nothing, no home, no respect, no purpose, no future worth protecting. Now I have all of those things, which means I'm willing to die to keep them. Joseph spoke up from his position near the door. Elena, where do you want to have this conversation? Elena understood that Joseph was asking whether she still intended to proceed with her plan. Part of her wanted to stay safe behind the station's walls and wait for the territorial marshal to arrive. But she knew that safety was an illusion. Cole and his men would find a way to get to her eventually, unless she took control of the situation now. Mr. Cole, Elena said, I'm willing to discuss terms, but not here. Too many witnesses, too much potential for misunderstandings. If you want to negotiate, we'll do it privately. Cole was immediately suspicious. Where? The wash at the base of this shelf. You bring one man, I'll bring one man. We'll talk like civilized people. And if we can't reach an agreement? Elena's voice carried a finality that surprised even her. Then we'll settle this in a less civilized manner. Cole considered this for a long moment. Very well. 1 hour from now? 30 minutes, Elena countered. I don't want this dragging on longer than necessary. After Cole left, the station erupted in quiet but urgent activity. Tom Bridger immediately began positioning men in the rocks above the wash, while Charlie Nguyen checked and rechecked his weapons. Elena, Joseph said as they prepared for what might be their final conversation, I want you to know something. What? When I married you, I thought I was gaining a political ally. I didn't expect to gain a partner I could actually respect. Elena felt warmth spread through her chest despite the danger they were facing. When I married you, I thought I was trading one form of captivity for another. I didn't expect to find out who I really am. And who are you really? Elena considered the question as she checked the small pistol Tom Bridger had insisted she carry. I'm someone who doesn't run away from fights, apparently. The 30 minutes passed quickly. Elena made her way down to the wash with Charlie Nguyen, while Tom Bridger and the others positioned themselves in the rocks above. The wash was exactly as Pete Sullivan had described, a natural trench about 8 feet deep, with sandy bottom and steep sides. Marcus Cole arrived precisely on time. Accompanied by a younger man with nervous eyes and quick hands, Elena could hear their breathing, their footsteps in the sand, the small sounds that told her exactly where they were positioned. Mrs. Crowfeather, Cole said as they faced each other across the narrow wash, I hope you've reconsidered our offer. I have, Elena replied. And I've decided to make you a final counteroffer. I'm listening. Elena's voice carried clearly. In the desert air, pitched so that the men hidden in the rocks above could hear every word. You and your men will leave this territory immediately. You will send word to Crawford Blackwood that Elena Crowfeather is not for sale, not for rent, and not for intimidation. And you will never return. Cole's laugh was genuinely amused. And in exchange for this generous offer, in exchange you get to live, Elena said simply. The silence that followed was broken by Cole's companion, whose nerves finally got the better of him. Boss, maybe we should consider. Shut up, Billy, Cole snapped. Then, to Elena, Mrs. Crowfeather, you're either very brave or very stupid. I'm something more dangerous than either, Elena replied. I'm desperate, and desperate people make very poor victims. Cole's voice took on a harder edge. Are you rejecting our final offer? I'm rejecting all your offers, Mr. Cole, now and forever. Elena heard the soft whisper of leather as Cole reached for his gun. In that instant, she understood that her gamble had worked. Cole was so focused on her that he had forgotten to watch for threats from other directions. Tom Bridger's voice rang out from the rocks above. Cole, drop your weapons. The gunfight that followed lasted less than 30 seconds, but it felt like hours to Elena. She threw herself against the wall of the wash as gunfire erupted around her, trusting that her allies' positioning would give them the advantage they needed. When the shooting stopped, Elena found herself crouched in the sand, her heart hammering but her body intact. Charlie Nguyen's voice reached her through the ringing. In her ears, "It's over, Mrs. Crowfeather. We got them." Elena stood slowly, brushing sand from her dress. Around her, she could hear the sounds of men checking bodies and securing weapons. The immediate threat was over, but she knew this was just the beginning of a larger war. "Charlie," she said quietly, "how many of them survived?" "Two ran when the shooting started. Cole and the young one are dead." Elena nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. She had never wanted anyone to die, but she understood that some battles couldn't be won without bloodshed. As Tom Bridger and the others climbed down from their positions, Elena realized that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. She was no longer Elena Morrison, the helpless blind girl from Silver Creek. She was no longer even the frightened new bride who had arrived at the Crowfeather Ranch a week ago. She was Elena Crowfeather, a woman who had just defeated professional killers through intelligence, courage, and careful planning. The question now was whether Crawford Blackwood was prepared to face the person she had become. 3 weeks after the gunfight at the stage station, Elena sat in the parlor of the Territorial Governor's Mansion in Phoenix, listening to the most extraordinary conversation of her life. Territorial Marshal James Rutherford had just finished reading aloud from a document that changed everything she thought she knew about her marriage. "Mrs. Crowfeather," Governor Harrison said, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and respect. "Did you have any idea that your husband was the largest private landowner in Arizona Territory?" Elena felt the world tilt around her. "I'm sorry, what?" Joseph's voice, when he answered, carried a note of sheepishness she had never heard before. "Elena, there are some things about my family's holdings that I simplified when we first met." "Marshal." Rutherford consulted his papers. According to territorial records, the Crowfeather Ranch encompasses 47,000 acres of grazing land, mineral rights to copper and silver deposits worth an estimated $2 million, and water rights that control irrigation for half the farming operations between here and Tucson. Elena felt dizzy. $2 million? That's a conservative estimate, the governor added. The copper deposits alone could be worth 3 times that amount once the railroad reaches them next year. Elena understood immediately why Crawford Blackwood had been so desperate to drive Joseph from his land. This wasn't about a successful ranch. This was about an empire worth more than some entire states. "Joseph," Elena said carefully, "when you told me you were well established, you may have understated the situation." Joseph moved closer to her chair. "Elena, I need you to understand why I didn't tell you the full scope of what you were marrying into. If word had gotten out about the true value of our holdings, every fortune hunter and confident man in the territory would have been scheming to get close to you," Elena finished. "Not to mention giving Blackwood even more reason to want you dead." "Exactly. The marriage contract Diego negotiated with your stepmother was deliberately modest to avoid drawing that kind of attention." Elena laughed, a sound that held little humor. "So when Constance thought she was selling me for a comfortable but unremarkable marriage, she was actually arranging for me to become one of the wealthiest women in the American West." "Essentially, yes." Governor Harrison cleared his throat. "Mrs. Crowfeather, there's another matter we need to discuss. Crawford Blackwood has filed a formal complaint with the territorial government, claiming that you and your husband murdered his employees in cold blood." Elena felt anger flare in her chest. "His employees were hired killers who attacked us first." "We know that," Marshal Rutherford said quickly. "Witness statements from the stage station, telegraph records, and physical evidence all support your version of events. But Blackwood has resources and political connections. He's demanding a formal inquiry." "Let him have one," Elena said firmly. "I'm not afraid of the truth," Governor Harrison smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Because we're prepared to offer you something more valuable than just vindication." "What do you mean?" "We mean that Crawford Blackwood has made a serious mistake," Marshal Rutherford explained. By attacking you and your husband, he's given us grounds to investigate all of his business practices. And what we're finding is illuminating. Elena leaned forward. What kind of illuminating? The kind that involves federal mail fraud, illegal seizure of mining claims, and conspiracy to commit murder, the governor said with satisfaction. It turns out that you weren't Blackwood's first target, just his most visible failure. Joseph spoke up. Are you saying he's done this before? At least 6 times in the past 3 years, Marshal Rutherford confirmed. Always the same pattern: harassment, legal challenges, and when those failed, violence. The difference is that his previous victims either died or fled the territory before they could expose him. Elena felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. But I didn't run, and I didn't die quietly. More than that, Governor Harrison said. You fought back in a way that created official records, witness testimony, and federal jurisdiction. You've given us everything we need to destroy him legally. The trial of Crawford Blackwood became the territorial sensation of 1887. Elena found herself testifying before packed courtrooms, describing in detail the campaign of intimidation and violence that had culminated in the attack at the stage station. Her blindness, which Blackwood's lawyers tried to portray as making her an unreliable witness, actually worked in her favor. Her testimony was so precise and detailed that it was clearly impossible to fabricate. The most dramatic moment came when Elena was asked to identify the voice of one of Blackwood's surviving gunfighters. As the man spoke from across the courtroom, Elena's response was immediate and certain. That's the voice of the man who threatened to burn down our ranch house with me inside it, she said clearly. I would recognize that voice anywhere. Blackwood himself never took the stand, but his presence in the courtroom was a constant reminder of what Elena had stood against. When the judge read the verdict guilty on all counts, Elena felt a satisfaction deeper than anything she had ever experienced. The sentence was equally satisfying. 25 years in territorial prison, forfeiture of all assets obtained through illegal means, and restitution to his victims' families. But the trial's most important outcome wasn't Blackwood's conviction, it was the precedent it established. Elena's case became the foundation for new territorial laws, protecting citizens from organized intimidation and illegal land seizures. Dr. Whitmore, who had testified as a character witness, approached Elena after the sentencing. Elena, I have a proposition for you, she said. The Territorial Medical Service wants to establish a new position, an advocate for crime victims, someone who can help people navigate the legal system and find the courage to stand up to criminals. Elena was intrigued. What would that involve? Travel throughout the territory, working with sheriffs and marshals to identify and support people in situations similar to what you faced. The position comes with a substantial salary and the authority to request federal assistance when needed. Elena looked toward Joseph, who was speaking with Marshal Rutherford nearby. What does my husband think about this? Dr. Whitmore smiled. Why don't you ask him? Though I suspect the man who married a woman brave enough to face down-hired killers won't object to her taking on corrupt officials and land grabbers. That evening, Elena and Joseph sat on the porch of their Phoenix hotel, listening to the sounds of a city celebrating justice served. Elena had changed into a simple dress, grateful to be out of the formal clothes required for court appearances. Joseph, she said quietly, I need to ask you something important. Anything. Do you think our marriage can survive me becoming a territorial official? The travel, the danger, the time away from the ranch. Joseph was quiet for a long moment. Elena, do you remember what I told you the night we met? About happiness being a luxury we couldn't afford? I remember. I was wrong. I've learned that happiness isn't a luxury. It's what happens when you find someone whose courage makes you braver, whose strength makes you stronger, whose dreams make you want to build something bigger than yourself. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Is that what I do for you? Every single day. The question is whether I do the same for you." Elena reached for his hand, finding it exactly where she expected it to be. "Joseph, when I married you, I thought I was trading my freedom for security. Instead, I discovered that real freedom comes from having something worth fighting for." "And what's worth fighting for?" Elena smiled, thinking about the job offer from Dr. Whitmore, the ranch they had defended, and the precedent they had set for others facing similar threats. "Everything we've built together. And everything we're going to build next." 6 months later, Elena Crowfeather rode into Silver Creek wearing the badge of a territorial victims advocate, leading a team of federal marshals investigating reports of corruption in the local government. The boarding house where she had once lived as Constance's burden looked smaller and shabbier than she remembered. Mrs. Chen met her at Murphy's Saloon, where Elena was scheduled to hold hearings for anyone with complaints about official misconduct. The older woman's embrace was warm and proud. "Elena," Mrs. Chen said through May's translation, "my mother says you have become exactly who you were always meant to be." Elena adjusted the badge on her jacket and smiled. "Tell her I finally figured out that being different isn't the same as being less." As Elena entered the saloon to begin her hearings, she reflected on how completely her life had changed. A year ago, she had been a burden nobody wanted. Today, she was a federal official with the power to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The blind girl from Silver Creek had become the richest woman in Arizona territory, not just in money but in purpose, respect, and the kind of love that made everything else possible. And she was just getting started. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.